When we talk about this attack that we're actually seeing, people need to understand billionaire Republicans are funding this effort to completely dismantle public education. Now, one reason why, and this is the leading reason, it has nothing to do with education. The targeting of public education is that they're targeting teachers' unions, which are the largest donor to the Democratic Party. So that's one. Two, what they also are trying to do, they are trying to create a right-wing Christian nation. So they want to be able to use these resources to allow folks and to send kids to right-wing schools and using the public funding. This was uncovered in Tennessee. We saw it in North Carolina. So folk need to understand, on the surface, they're trying to say, oh, this is to improve public education. No, you got to know what's happening behind the scenes and who are the forces trying to do this in North Carolina, in Florida, in Tennessee, in Texas, and other states.
Right. And to your point, you know, Republicans are not creative in the way that they sort of move these strategies. They get these bills and then they run them across the country. And so you mentioned that this happened in Texas, this happened in Florida, Tennessee. It also happened in Georgia, which I'm sure Representative Jackson will talk about this year, where they passed another voucher bill. But I remember my first year serving in the Georgia House of Representatives, the Republican who sat next to me said to me that he fully believed that public education should not even exist, that he felt that parents should be in charge of teaching their kids. And I said, well, what about parents who have to go to work? And not everybody can afford to have a parent stay home. That's a luxury nowadays when one income can cover an entire household. And he said, well, I just think that parents should have done whatever they needed to do in order to make sure, set up their family properly to make sure that one person can stay home and teach the kids. So these are people who are willing to go to such extremes to achieve the goal that you are talking about, which is to, if schools are going to exist, their ultimate goal is to just get rid of schools. But if schools have to exist, they better be schools where kids are being groomed and taught white nationalist Christian values. That is what they want. And they will do everything they can to continue to chip away at that, making that the case. But let me
add to that, Renata, because what that also ties to abortion. What these fundamentalist white conservative evangelicals desire, Speaker Mike Johnson, the worldview that they have is for every woman to stay at home, birth babies, have dinner ready for their husband. That's also a part of this agenda.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And that is what the Republican who was sitting next to me was saying about you should have set up your family in a way that allows for that one person to stay home. He was not talking about, and it might be a toss up between if it's a man or the woman who stays home. He absolutely meant that women should be at home teaching the kids these white national Christian fundamentalist values. So what we have to remember is, like I said before, Republicans are not creative. These are the same bills they run across the entire country. When we see it happen in one state, you absolutely have to know that it's going to come to another Republican state, and we need to be ready every time to defeat them.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Derek, here's something that I think people to understand when we talk about this here as well. I'm going to pull this up, and that is this here. Yesterday, if you go to my iPad, yesterday was the anniversary of when Robert Smalls and some other Black Americans took control of a Confederate ship in Charleston. This is from Jerry Mitchell, who's out of Mississippi. Wearing a straw hat to cover his face, Smalls disguised himself as a Confederate captain. His wife, Hannah, and members of other families joined them. Smalls sailed safely through Confederate territory by using hand signals contained in the captain's code book. And when he and the 17 Black passengers landed in Union territory, they went to slavery to freedom. He became a hero in the North, helped convince Union leaders to permit Black soldiers to fight, and became part of the war effort. But this is why I'm reading this. After the war ended, he returned to his native Beaufort, South Carolina, where he bought his former slaveholder's home and allowed his widow to live there until her death. He served 5 terms in Congress, one of more than a dozen Black Americans to serve during Reconstruction. He also authored legislation that enabled South Carolina to have one of the nation's first free and compulsory public school systems and bought a building to use as a school for black children. This is the statue of Robert Smalls. Now, Derek, the reason that is important is because what people don't understand is that to understand where we are in this country, the reason there is tax-funded education, because you can thank black people. It was free people of African descent who got elected to state legislatures. And one of the first things they did was put that into the state constitution. Now, after Reconstruction ended, the white folks ran the black folks out, but they kept that. So the reason you are seeing state-funded education, because that was not the law in America, is because of black people. And what Renita just talked about, what you have these white conservative Republicans, they despise that because they say, oh, they're being indoctrinated. So that's why the book banning, the attacks on CRT, liberals they're indoctrinating our kids. That's why the Republicans are allowing PragerU to come in with their work into the schools, because they're like, oh, these are liberal dens, because this is all about if you can tear down the public education system, then you now can control the hearts and minds of children for the next several generations.
You know, Roland, I'm glad you highlighted the Reconstruction period, because if you read the Project 2025, as I did, nearly 1,000 pages, they go back to Reconstruction period. They're aiming to destroy everything, all the black progressive accomplishments since Reconstructive period. To this point, that's the whole Project 2025. The other piece that you're highlighting is this too, Roland. They've been after public education for a very long time because they realize if the electorate is not equipped with the knowledge and the wisdom to be able to call them on their BS. So think about it. All those Trumpers that's following them, it doesn't sound like they're very educated. And I'm not demeaning them. I'm just saying a person that can think for themselves and they understand the value of wisdom and education cannot be led astray. And so Project 2025 starts at Reconstruction period. So this thing about affirmative action that's been around for 50 years, check, they took care of that. DEI, check, they're taking care of that. CRT, and so if folks don't think that they can go back, all those things were precedented law and policies and norms that have been in place, Roland. If you don't think they can go back, just ask Arizona, because they went back to 1864. And what happened a year before that? 1863, Emancipation Proclamation. So that's the reason why I tell all my constituents, you better wake up, because you keep asking this rhetorical question, how far back they want to go. Right. Well, they just demonstrated that they can go back to 160 years.
Well, in fact, in one of the Supreme Court rulings, that's actually what Justice Sam Alito did. He referenced laws dating back to the 1800s. Julian, again, we're talking about what's happening with education. Again, this is one of the most important books that folks should read. I probably have sold more copies of this book than he has, because I've included him in numerous speeches that I've given over the past several years. Go to my iPad, Anthony. James D. Anderson wrote the book called The Education of Blacks in the South, 1860 to 1935. And he details the battle of African Americans when it comes to education, but also creating this point. And so when we talk about what's happening, I need people to understand what the Republicans are trying to do is literally destroy a system that black people put into place because they understood that white racist slaveholders, they said, wait a minute, if these people want to kill us for learning to read and write, there must be some type of power that comes with that learning to read and write. And so one of the first, in this particular book, he talks about how the white abolitionists came to the South shortly after the Emancipation Proclamation. And the white abolitionists were like, oh, we got to get down there to educate these poor black people. They got there and realized 500 schools had already been created by black folks who could barely read and write. They were like, we wasn't waiting on y'all. And so what you're seeing, the attempt to dismantle public education, is the attempt to dismantle one of the most fundamental things that black people helped make possible in this country, because they would want to make sure that our kids could be educated. So when you underfund schools today, and most public schools in America are predominantly black and brown, this is an absolute direct assault on black people.
Well, there's no question at all, Roland. And when that book is a great book. I've read it a couple of times, actually. There is, when I was inaugurated as president of Bennett, my inaugural speech included these words: to teach a slave to read is to excite dissatisfaction to the detriment of the general population. That was a 1831 law that was passed in North Carolina. It went on to say that if a white person taught a black person to read, they could be fined, what today would be thousands of dollars. But if a black person taught a black person to read, they could be flogged up to 40 times. That's how dangerous our intelligence is. So when people tell the stupid trope, if you want to hide something from a black person, put in a book, that's nothing but a bloody lie. Basically, we have always thirsted for education, and they have always tried very hard to keep it from us. So these attacks on public schools, and if we went school district by school district in terms of those schools that are heavily black, you would find that many of them are now on half days for high school students. Some of the main things that we count on for education, civics. Many schools have removed civics education. And then some people think of sports and band and music as frivolous, but they're not frivolous things. They teach people how to be citizens in the world. But we go and look at these school districts, and what we're seeing is cutting, cutting, cutting. The Houston case is very unfortunate, but it's also not especially unusual. This one, because Greg Abbott is missing a brain cell somewhere or another, and he's on the attack. And what he's trying to do is basically out-Trump at some level. But, most people don't publicize it. They just do it quietly.
Right.
What I'd be interested in knowing about Houston is what's the racial composition of the people that they're getting rid of. The other thing that I'd be interested in knowing, do people understand when you fire the custodian and say you can come back, but without benefits, somebody's making money off that. And so we always have to follow the money. Who are these companies that are doing the contracting with the schools? Who owns them, and what are they gaining? And that's a really important question, because when you have predatory capitalism, you have somebody who is always going to gain, especially when black people lose. So it's pervasive. And the challenge is with the sister you just had on, sister from John Jay, she said people get weary. People get tired. I talked to a young brother that he said he's not voting. He's sick of politics. And when I ran it down to him, I'm like, dude, really? He told me, Roland, that everybody talks about student loan forgiveness, but he didn't go to college. So there's a class bias to all these things that Biden has done, which isn't the case, but he's been listening to the wrong black nationalists, and he was confident enough to run this nonsense by me until I shut him down. But even still, a young black man, 20, who just doesn't believe in voting. How can he not believe in voting? Because we're not teaching voting. In civics, you used to teach voting. You used to teach about what your choices were. Now you've got these folks who are basically, they're threatening your book, White people, lays it out. They're threatened, and they're going to do anything they can to go back, not forward.
Fanbase is pioneering a new era of social media for the creator economy. This next generation social media app with over 600,000 users is raising $17 million, and now is your chance to invest. For details on how to invest, visit startengine.com/fanbase or scan the QR code. Another way we're giving you the freedom to be you without limits.